I am introducing today is also alumni from my own center, my own medical college, Rohtak. She is from 1998 batch, and I am from 74. So very nice to know that my institution is producing and giving good contribution to the society and to the nation. Dr. Shefali Sardana is in the team of Dr. Harit Chaturvedi, as we have been just told. And she is now the lead consultant, medical oncology, gastroenterology, hepatobiliary and gynae oncology. And presently, she is with Indraprastha Apollo Athena Women Cancer Center. So can we say it's a pink team for the cancer? So we wish you the best of luck with it's a upcoming and a new venture. And I think females feel more comfortable when they talk to a female to show the everything, genitals and all, to a female. I was impressed that she had written a chapter for Indian Association of Physicians Annual, which is on gut microbiome and cancer. You all know that gut microbiome is a very, very important and upcoming topic. It affects everything, cancer, even our personality. She is a upcoming cancer specialist, and I won't take much time. She is also having special interest in kidney cancer, and I'll just invite her for her talk. Thank you.
All of you. I think the gist and the context has been already set by Dr. Harit. Okay, right. So the context has been set by Dr. Harit already, and we all relish his presence everywhere. So he's more like say, eldest person of the family, as well as a leader, as well as a mentor for all of us. So that is what emotions we carry for him. But of course, apart from that, the important thing what he shared is the kind of focus what we have brought with the mindset to Apollo, that we will work on the focused approach, organ-based approach, and the dedicated approach. That is what we dream to do, that is what we commit to do and intend to do. So because that is the precision oncology what is all meant for. So I am the medical oncologist who will be treating the GI, HPV and gynae onco cases. My interest extends to uro-oncology also. That's I have been practicing for last so many years. I was doing this in MAX also. So carrying it forward, today's topic will be for just a discussion and mention. You are all aware of what changes are happening in oncology, and we'll be just highlighting a couple of these, what we are already doing it. So focus on colorectal cancers today. So we know that metastatic colorectal cancer has a critical prognosis. 5-year survival rate may be even as low as 10% in aggressive and advanced cases. Approximately 25% of the patients show synchronous metastasis, and 25% may develop a metachronous, that is a metastasis developing during the course of treatment or the journey of patient. And we know that this treatment particularly has undergone substantial changes in last 20 years, and we'll be in subsequent slide comparing that what kind of changes have happened and why we are talking more and more about the precision oncology. While surgery remains the cornerstone of the treatment, Dr. Nikhil is smiling there, but I can't deny that fact. So that is the cornerstone for early stage colorectal cancer. But coming to the advanced stages, it's a mix and match of all modalities. So that is where the precision stands. Earlier, the advanced unresectable would mean the palliative treatment, but now it's a focused treatment to make sure that how can we extend survival more by making use of all modalities, even surgery, and where to use it to extend that meaningful advantage. So recent advances include all modalities. All modalities have undergone so many changes over last years, so that there is a change in the usage of surgery, place of surgery, which Dr. Nikhil would be talking about, maybe HIPEC where we are using it, maybe the surgery in the stage 4, mix and match of liver-directed therapies with surgery. That is what the precision oncology stands for. Coming to chemotherapy, though we know that conventional chemotherapy has been same throughout the years, but there has been an add-on treatment in the form of targeted therapy, in the form of molecular markers directed treatment, in the form of the genetic based treatment, immunotherapies. And radiation therapy, for your introduction, Dr. Aditi Agrawal, who leads the GI radiation oncology team in Apollo with us. So she handles the GI radiation cases. And to give you a basic overview, that we know that colon cancer management basically involves the management of early and metastatic cases. Now in early cases, where we define it basically stage 1 and stage 2 and little locally advanced, that is stage 3, still in the curative arm, these three stages may not always require each modality as a treatment option. Means in stage 1, the surgery is the only curative option. People may not require anything beyond surgery. Now if we talk of stage 2, again, in subsequent slides, I will be highlighting that how can we avoid chemotherapy now in the era of precision oncology, and how can we monitor the success rate of avoiding that. And if we come to stage 3, of course, majority will require surgery and chemotherapy as a treatment option, but here again there is a change in terms of utilization of an information which is the molecular marker in terms of MSI, and immunotherapy is upcoming in this modality in stage 3. Now stage 4, we all know there is mix and match of so many systemic therapies, like we discussed the targeted therapies, molecular therapies, immunotherapies, mix and match of surgery, radiation and chemotherapy. So if we talk about this very subgroup, where we have option of observation versus adjuvant chemotherapy, so that is in the stage 2. How do we decide? Earlier we would always discuss, okay, option observation भी है, option chemo भी है, so because we don't know how much and how can we avoid chemo, for a safer side you please take chemo. Now this is not the scenario. Now the scenario is based upon many histopathological factors, based upon many molecular factors. You can always say preferred option is observation with a confidence, and you can avoid chemotherapy because benefit may be only 2%. So that is how we put the facts with the patient nowadays. And patients with high risk features, they often receive adjuvant chemo, that is the stage 3 precisely, that is node positive cases. And this is the important slide. We just need to understand the crux of it. Like we were talking stage 2 colon cancer patients, where it is precisely T3N0, where the benefit of chemotherapy, if you can see, is 4%. 4% will be cured by chemotherapy in addition to surgery. Now there will be 16% who will not get benefited out of it. And in 80% roughly, they are cured by surgery alone. So how to decide and how to figure out who needs what? So that is how the patients now currently we are dividing into broadly these 3 areas. And to decide about who needs what, we have something called as a MRD assessment in this subgroup. Now what is MRD? Hematological cases में हमने हमेशा सुना है कि after treating aggressively we always assess the bone marrow to see what is the minimal residual disease left out there, so that we know that okay, these are the patients who will do badly, who will relapse. Vis-a-vis who are in complete remission, they will not. Now the similar kind of concept was tested in colon cancer, and they found out that yes, there is something called as MRD in colon cancer also. And how can we test MRD? On the basis of ctDNA. Now we know that while during the journey of a tumor, it sheds some kind of tumor antigens in the blood. And here the tumor DNA, we pick it up, we see for those kind of antigens, we see for those kind of mutations. And we check whether the tumor agnostic mutations or tumor informed mutations are present in that very particular DNA, so that we can predict whether this patient is high risk of relapse or not. And that is how we can decide, okay, you want a preferred area of observation versus you are in that risk where the chances of relapse are very, very high, say almost to the tune of 100%. Now there are very well established randomized trials which suggest that if a patient post-surgery at 4 weeks or 8 weeks or maybe 12 weeks, if detected to have a positive ctDNA, that patient's relapse risk is almost 100%. So what does that mean? Whether that patient requires for sure a chemotherapy? Yes. But what kind of benefit we are going to offer, whether to label him as palliative, the trials are somewhat answering right now, but major answers will be given in the time to come. So that is the concept of MRD. Now, why ctDNA concept is important? As you can see that we need to detect the cancer cells to the minutest of the possibility if it is there in the body. Now, if you see the X-ray, X-ray has a sensitivity to detect 10 to the power 9 cancer cells if they are present in the body. That is a significant, sizable, measurable disease in the body. Now, if we see CT scan, they can detect up to 10 to the power 7. Now, the beauty of ctDNA is they can go as low as 10 to the power 5 cancer cells. And even if we talk of a cell-free DNA and so on and so forth, the sensitivity further increases to the tune of, say, minimum number of cells to be detected. How ctDNA can define MRD? That graph can very well explain that. The kind of detection by imaging, what we see, the kind of detection by ctDNA, but there is still a long way to go. So you can see the bottom line that still this is chunkable size which is still not detected by ctDNA. So oncology is yet to evolve in that space. So how do you utilize ctDNA? Starting from the early detection till the advanced stage where we monitor the prognosis and the effect of the treatment, ctDNA has a role at every basic aspect. You see the early detection, you see the molecular profiling, you see the monitoring of the molecular residual disease, assessing the response of treatment, and see all patients may not be secretors. CEA may not be guiding factor every time. So you have something which can guide you through the therapy. So it has to be done periodically. So this is the dynamic trial which I was pointing about on the role of ctDNA, which was showing that how ctDNA can make a difference and predict that, okay, which patient is at what risk of relapse during the course of treatment. Now something about liquid biopsy. So liquid biopsy is a comparatively newer concept, but it's not a very new. So, tissue biopsy, we all know it for the diagnosis. Now this is something called as a liquid biopsy. Sometimes the situation may come where in the course of treatment, patient may not be willing for a repeated sampling of the tissue. That is traumatic sometimes, not physically but mentally. So we have that option of liquid biopsy available, which is a simple blood testing. If we know the tumor profiling at upfront, we can always measure the treatment response and new mutations coming up through the liquid biopsy. So it's a simple blood test. Turnaround time is almost only 12 to 14 days. With the good lab, it can be as low as 10 days, and you will be informed about the complete molecular profiling of the tumor during the course of the treatment. And you can always modify your treatment, you can always suggest a change, you can always monitor the response and continue your plan of treatment there. So of course, Having said that, two important things which really matter here is the performance status, which cannot be ruled out by any newer modality, and your therapeutic goal. What are families or patients' expectations out of the treatment, and what is your expectations out of the treatment, that the survival outcome, the life expectancy, what you are vouching for. So I was talking in the beginning about what difference a decade makes, and this slide very well explains that. If you see 2015, everybody was talking that cancer is clonal. Clonal means one stem cell giving rise to one modality or one area of, say, multiplication. Now in 2025 or maybe 26 now, cancer we know is polyclonal. It is heterogeneous. There may be subclonal populations which are heterogeneous in terms of molecular profiling. Different antigens may be shedded by different sites of metastasis. Now, how can we detect that? So liquid biopsy is coming up, because tumors shed their antigen into the blood if there is a huge load, and you can detect it easily through the liquid biopsy. Now, we were talking 10 years back that primary cancer, we have a specific therapy. Now, we have shifted our gears to molecular marker specific therapy. It's not the organ which is targeted first, it's the expression of the antigen in that organ or in that tumor which is the basic of treatment now. So 2015 everybody was talking immunotherapies will never work. There is nothing called as immunotherapy. So it may be a hype, it may be a, say, over projected thing, but now we know immunotherapies are in every organ. You name organ, you have the trial, randomized trial, phase 3 trial, giving you the solutions in terms of immunotherapies. Now we were talking, molecular testing is not my area of expertise. We cannot do it. So can we have something from the West to have that answer from? But nowadays, I think including me, every medical oncologist is vouching for that molecular testing. We are learning through the process and we have evolved somewhat, but there is still a lot more to go. That is how the decade is making a difference. Now microbiome we were already discussing, so this topic is very close to my heart, and that is why I chose to write a chapter on it. So initially we were talking, how does it make a difference? What is the microbiome inside the body? How will it make a difference to the treatment? But now we see that it can altogether change the treatment response. So if patient has a good microbiome, say antigenicity improves, that is how the response to immunotherapy improves, that is how the prognosis improves, that is how the survival difference improves. So we are talking about microbiome nowadays, a lot more trials, a lot more work is to do in this field right now. Cost of the treatment used to be very, very high. Like immunotherapy, if I talk about say 5 to 7 years back when it came, one cycle of immunotherapy would cost around say 5 to 6 lakhs on an average. Now with multiple usages in every organ, the cost has come down to as low as 1 lakh to 1.5 lakh per cycle, and now fortunately India has biosimilar of immunotherapy also, which is almost the 1/3 of cost of innovator, that is 50,000 per cycle. So that is what a decade makes a difference here. Now chat of 2 months initially to test molecular profiling to less than 7 days. That is what a decade makes a difference in treatment. We are still on the initial footsteps. There is a lot more to go. We are learning daily, new trials daily, and that is why I would like to highlight that there is a need for organ-based specialization, because everybody cannot be perfect. There has to be work-life balance, there has to be a work-work balance. So you have to be justified in treatment of your patients because you are responsible for that. So if you can make more learnings in your area, if you can translate that learning into practicality, I think that makes a difference rather than being a master of all and jack of none. That is whatever, you can say. Jack of all, master of none, sorry. So that is where the difference lies. So there is a lot more to go. So coming from, say, what we were talking of mutations to DNA, to RNA, to proteins, and now we are talking of what is called as multiomics. I think I also got overwhelmed like you when I learned first about what is all multiomics is. So as you can see, multiomics is basically the understanding of genome, then what is being translated from DNA in terms of RNA and protein, what you have transcriptome, and then you have what protein which is available, which is functional unit, you have say proteomics, and then to study the effect of that protein into the body is what you have say all understanding of what is called as a multiomics. So we are moving towards that era, and somewhat we have already moved on. So these are what you can see are approved tissue agnostic therapies in colorectal cancers. What is tissue agnostic means that based on molecular profiling, like I was talking about, now we are talking about molecular based specific therapies. Starting from conventional chemotherapies, the guidelines worldwide, the Indian guidelines also have moved on to what is called as a tissue agnostic therapy now. BRAF mutation is one good evolve in colorectal cancer space. So earlier BRAF mutation advanced tumors, we knew that the average lifespan is 9 months or a year because these are most aggressive. They don't respond to chemotherapy in a durable term, but now we have anti-BRAF therapies available. So the times are changing in terms of survival. Similarly, in earlier times, say 5 years, 7 years back, we knew only about HER2 amplification or HER2 by IHC. But now we are talking about ERBB2 alterations in terms of the point mutations. That is where the therapy is evolving, and you must have heard of, say, TDXD, a molecule called as trastuzumab deruxtecan, which acts on, say, HER2 mutations also. And that is how the colorectal space is also evolving. So immunotherapy we were talking about, that is the most talked about these days. Because, 3 years back there was an article in every publication, every newspaper that rectal cancer advanced is 100% curable. There is a magic drug which is coming up, dostarlimab. So one thing I would like to highlight here is whatever the media say, it becomes our responsibility to make it more clearer to our patients. So it's not a magic bullet first of all. Because MSI high is seen in only 5 to 7% cases of colorectal cancers. And it is only in these subsets where this works as a magic bullet. So we should not say 100% rectal cancers are curable. No, it is not like that. It is only the MSI high or a mismatch deficient repair system where this immunotherapy will work wonders, and the response rates will go up to as high as 70%. So that is how the immunotherapy works. This is the trial which highlights the difference between, you can say the upline is about the immunotherapy versus the chemotherapy use. And that is the pan-tumor MSI assessment. So now world recommends to test MSI or MMR by IHC in every organ cancer, because the deficient MMR or MSI high is the area where immunotherapy can change the game altogether. And pembrolizumab is one of them, dostarlimab is one of them. We are now listening towards low-dose immunotherapy. There is much spoken about in the newspapers that can we do low-dose immunotherapies in India, resource-constrained setting. Of course, the answer is yes, because we have our own data, our own setting, which says that everybody cannot afford a 3 lakh or a 2 lakh treatment. So we have to customize according to our population. So, but that does not mean again that this is bottom line for all, that everybody would respond to low-dose immuno. We have our own small subset data from India. It's not a validated outside data. It's not a reproducible data yet outside population. So we have that option. We can definitely customize, especially in the areas where we have our own authenticated data, that is in head and neck tumors, where Tata has a publication, in breast tumor, where AIMS has a publication. We can utilize that, but not as a bottom line for everyone. So again, hitting the jackpot is the golden ticket. If we are lucky enough to find out those mutations in our patients, we have the drug therapy available in India. So that is the beauty of it. And ASCO also gives the provisional clinical opinion that somatic genomic testing should be done in metastatic and advanced cancers, and these are the indications which are highlighted by American Society of Clinical Oncology, that is ASCO, which is the leading guidelines making society in the world. And if I conclude that a lot has changed in terms of approach and treatment of colorectal cancer in 2026, however, yet there is a lot more unmet need to be catered. Precision oncology and organ-based approach and MDT is the way forward. That is multidisciplinary team effort, because one size does not fit all. That we all know. Thank you. Any questions?
Good evening, everyone. It gives me an immense pleasure to invite Dr. Nikhil Agarwal, who is a renowned GI HPV surgical oncologist and one of the very few surgeons in India whose practice is exclusively dedicated to upper GI and HPV cancer. Dr. Agarwal has been trained in Banaras Hindu University, SGPGI Lucknow, and completed his MCH in GI surgery from AIIMS, New Delhi. So as you can see, he has a vast experience of working in premier institute all along the India. He later served as faculty at the Institute of Liver and Biliary Sciences, that is ILBS, established the GI HPV and GI cancer program at Dharamshila Narayana Hospital, and led one of the India's major robotic GI HPV oncology program at Max. And he is currently a lead consultant in GI HPV surgical oncology at Apollo Hospital, New Delhi and Gurgaon. He is also known for his expertise in advanced laparoscopic and robotic GI HPV cancer surgery. His commitment to evidence-based and ethical care and his ability to combine technical excellence with sound judgment make him a very distinct surgeon. He has published in reputed journals, including recent work on minimally invasive management of suspected gallbladder cancer. He is a regular invited faculty at major national GI, HPV and surgical oncology conferences. He is also a robotic surgery proctor teaching and training surgeons in advanced robotic GI, HPV cancer surgery. So, welcome Dr. Nikhil Agarwal. The stage is all yours.
Thank you for the kind introduction. Good evening, everyone. I am keeping you away from your dinner and drinks, but try to be as brief as possible. Why are you talking about GI HPV surgical oncology? So GI HPV surgery, especially the surgical oncology, is a field which is fraught with challenges, difficulty, and you must be encountering it in your practice almost on a daily basis. And when you encounter a patient with GI HPV cancer, the first thought which comes to your mind is generally a little nihilistic. You think that, this guy's life is almost done. But fortunately today we kind of can change, not completely all of it, but part of it. So we'll just take you through the journey where we have reached in GI HPV cancer surgery. But before that, I would want to emphasize about the multidisciplinary care or a focused approach these patients would require, or not only these patients, any cancer would require. So we move from the era where one person or one medical oncologist and one radiation oncologist treat every cancer. You need dedicated specialists for each and every cancer. And this is our team where, which is like all specialists. So everybody specializes in one specific cancer and then they work together as a team. This is our GI HPV surgical oncology team. You have Asit Arora and Anshul there. Asit is specializing in colorectal and I focus on upper GI and HPV cancer. Dr. Anshul has recently joined us, and we cannot do anything alone. We are flanked by our medical and radiation oncologists who walk step in step with us, and that's how we can do what we can do. When it comes to state of the art in surgical side of it, so what we want to do is we want to improve resectability, we want to improve survival, we want to improve acceptance for the patients and for the referring physicians, while at the same time decreasing the morbidity, decreasing the complications, and overall improving the quantity as well as quality of life. I'll focus on 4 things by doing what we can achieve these things is: 1, minimally invasive surgery that includes both robotic as well as laparoscopic surgery; integrated multidisciplinary treatment that include everything which comes along with the surgery, be it medical oncology, molecular oncology, radiation oncology, psycho-oncology, everything put together. The advanced cancers, stage 4 cancers, where generally it's considered a hopeless situation. How do we, tailor our treatment approaches to help one of these patients? And at the same time, how we can preserve function and organ for some of these patients. So coming to the minimally invasive surgery, movements are more precise, tremors are filtered, you have better control and more precision. So this is one short video of a robotic Whipple procedure, and you can see the robotic action. So the robotic arms has that, they can mimic the movement of your arm, unlike laparoscopic arm. So laparoscopic arm have only this movement and this movement, while robotic arm just mimics the hand movement of our hand. So it goes in all 360 direction. With the stability of the platform, I mean, you can do laparoscopic Whipple also, and there are large series on laparoscopic Whipple, but I've never been a fan of laparoscopic Whipple because of the ergonomics and the technical difficulties which we encountered. And we used to do very selected patients with the laparoscopic approach. As I said, the robotic approach has lowered our threshold, and I'll just fast forward a bit. So this is how many surgeons do we have now? So this is called as tunnel of love. You dissect the pancreatic neck, you put in a tube there, and then you divide the neck. And then when you have done the resection in robotic Whipple, then you move on to the reconstruction part. So you remove the pancreatic head and then you join the small intestine to the pancreas and the bile duct and the stomach. So these were the major problems in which you can't do these procedures laparoscopically because the hand movements were difficult, the movement, rotation and all those things were difficult. But robotics, it helps. When it comes to the advantages of a robotic procedure over a laparoscopic or an open procedure, so now we have some data which suggests that yes, it does help our patients. Arterial resection rate, lymph node yield, and blood loss, blood transfusion, all of them are comparable. And a recent study which was published, it shows that textbook outcomes. The word we use, textbook outcomes, when you want a predictable hospital course, which is almost what should happen to a patient, is higher with robotic surgery. Another concern when it comes to oncological procedure is radicality. What you want to achieve is a very good R0 resection rate where you completely remove the tumor with all the lymph nodes. And whenever we talk about minimally invasive procedures, the concern is both for the physicians and patients is that will it achieve equivalent radicality to open surgery. We are also concerned about that because at the end of the day, radicality of surgery and the long-term survival outcome is what stays with the patient. When it comes to the advantages of minimally invasive surgery, that is mainly short-term advantages. You go home faster, your recovery is earlier, you go on to join work earlier. But radicality is something which stays with the patient for the long term because that's what makes the survival advantage. I can skip this video. This is a radical cholecystectomy video where you do a lymph node dissection around the porta hepatis. Porta hepatis is a difficult area. Why it is a difficult area? Because the blood supply of the liver, the venous drainage of the liver, and the bile duct, all three are in that area in a very narrow space. And you have to clear that space, you have to remove all the lymph nodes. And the lymph node yield or the clearance of that area is something which determines that whether the cancer cells from that area have been cleaned or not. So I'll just skip to the last part. So here you can see this is the bile duct completely clear, and this is the nodes behind the porta. This thing is the porta. Now this view you can see all the structures in the porta has been cleared. And I'll just show you some data. So obviously this is a small series because these cases are not very common and this is a 1 year data. If we now focus on one number, which is lymph node yield, right? And here you can see the median lymph node yield is approximately 14. If you look at series, mostly from across the world, the median lymph node in those series will be 3, 5, 7. So with robotic surgery, you can achieve very good lymph node yield, even in such a difficult area. And if we look at the hospital stay, which will be around, apart from the one patient who was CLD, it's less than 5 years in most patients. So that's how robotic surgery or laparoscopic surgery can achieve good lymph node yield, good radicality, and at the same time decreasing the hospital stay. Now, as we talk about minimally invasive surgery, there's one question which you must often be encountering is that when your patients present with a thick walled gallbladder and you are thinking whether it is just a cholecystitis or a malignancy. So most of the time we would do an open surgery. We used to do an open surgery for these patients because of the fear of disseminating cancer cells by doing a laparoscopic or robotic surgery. We recently published our approach and our outcome in such a group of patients where we propose a tailored approach where whether it's a benign case or a very low risk or low risk, and then we can do a laparoscopic cystic plate cholecystectomy or anticipatory extended cholecystectomy followed by frozen, and if the frozen is positive here, then you do a radical cholecystectomy. This is just to emphasize how these minimally invasive approaches can remove a large organ, like say in this case the total proctocolectomy, the whole colon can be removed through a small incision in the abdomen. So this is the audit of last year audits of our unit, and here you can see, as I said, 2/3 of cases, 1/3 robotic, 1/3 laparoscopic, and 1/3 open. So minimally invasive is almost 80% of our total unit, and I'm talking about only radical resections. This doesn't include smaller cases like cholecystectomy and all that. These are all radical resections. So with this approach, this is how we can decrease the morbidity and increase the acceptability among our patients. I've already discussed about the integrated approach and how does it impact survival for our patients. One, we adopt neoadjuvant approaches for most of our cancers, be it rectal cancer, be it esophageal cancer, be it stomach cancer. Some of them we are still operating upfront, like colorectal cancer. Dr. Shefali talked about MSI high cancers, where obviously the immunotherapy has made a sea change. Normally you see incremental difference when a trial comes, it says 3% better outcome. It completely changed the landscape. That's dMMR tumors. And similarly neoadjuvant therapy for borderline resectable and locally advanced pancreatic cancer. So these approaches have improved outcome. Really, I mean, not by 1%, 2%. These approaches has helped achieve meaningful outcome for our patients. Where you used to think about, you have esophageal cancer, very few of them will survive to be. Have now capacity to say in our OPD, okay, don't worry. I mean, if you have esophageal cancer, there's almost 2/3 chance that you will make it long term. So that's what these approaches has helped us achieve. Another problem area is that GI cancers present in a very advanced stage. Depending on the organ we are talking about, almost half to 90% of our patients is presenting stage 4 cancers. That's a very advanced stage. And generally the convention is that stage 4 cancers are incurable. Their median survival or their 5-year survival is almost negligible. Obviously with chemotherapy we have achieved meaningful survival in these patients also, but if some of them, we label them as potentially curative, we were used for as oligometastatic. Not for all cancers, but some cancers. Say for example, colorectal cancer and gastric cancers. If you have few metastases which are localized to liver or to lung, and if we do take a curative approach in them, which will definitely involve a multimodality treatment like neoadjuvant treatment first, but if we take a potentially curative approach, we can achieve meaningful outcome in them. For an example, I'll take the case of colorectal cancer because for that we have the maximum number of data, we have best possible outcome. Now if you see in colorectal cancer, if you just do best chemotherapy, median survival will be around 2 years. But if you are able to achieve resection in them, your 5-year survival rates approaches almost 50 to 60%, which is as good as any GI cancer. I mean, if you have a colon cancer stage 3, it's around 60%, 70%, and in pancreatic cancer, that number is around 30%. So compared to these, 50 to 60% is a very good number. Obviously with a minimal morbidity and mortality, though many of them will recur at the end of 5 years and possibly a lot of them at the end of 10 years, but we would have achieved a very meaningful survival in most of these patients. But it does require a very, very careful planning, be it operative planning, be it multimodal planning. You have to bring in chemotherapy at some point of time, surgery at some point of time, radiation at some point of time. When there is no fixed protocol, it has to be individualized on a case-to-case basis. These are some of the variables which we will use in the decision-making process. This is a case of patient who presented to us with sigmoid colon cancer and solitary liver metastasis. This is a patient which we did upfront surgery. Upfront surgery, it means that we did both surgery at the same time in one go and both were laparoscopy. This is a device which is called as intraoperative ultrasound, and if you are operating on a liver tumor with minimal invasive technique, you have to have this device and master this device. I'll again skip this video. Maybe I'll just go to the last part. So we'll also use something called as CUSA in these patients, which will help us dissect liver parenchyma and check the blood vessels and biliary radicals. And this is the completed structure, and you can see, you could see the left pedicle and the left portal vein, and this is the colon part being completed. So that was stage 4 cancers with liver metastasis. Now the same thing we can talk about stage 4 colorectal cancers with peritoneal metastasis. Again, these patients, if they have limited peritoneal metastasis. Now what do we mean by limited peritoneal metastasis is that we have to do some scoring system. We have to calculate the volume of metastasis in the peritoneum. This is the score we use, peritoneal carcinomatosis index. And if it is less than 18 or 17, these are the patients who would benefit from a curative approach. We give them neoadjuvant chemotherapy, we take them up for surgery, we clean the abdomen of any disease. Sometimes we will do HIPEC, and again we get meaningful survival. Complete CC score is something which we use at the end of the surgery to communicate that whether we have achieved the complete cytoreduction or not. So this is the cytoreduction being achieved, and the HIPEC, and this is the data which says that if you do cytoreductive surgery with or without HIPEC in this group of patients, your survival improves significantly compared to not doing anything in these patients. So these are the patients I highlighted because these are the patients where we used to have a nihilistic approach. You have stage 4 GI cancer, nothing can be done for you, you will have very limited survival. But fortunately for some of these patients with oligometastatic disease, we can think of doing something which will give them meaningful survival. Similarly, for advanced GBC, advanced liver cancers, advanced hilar cholangiocarcinomas, we can do surgery where we can remove almost 2/3 of their liver. The problem with these patients is that most of the time when we remove 2/3 of the liver, their remaining liver is small. We call them FLR. And these are the strategies we use to increase the FLR in these patients. And most common is portal vein embolization. And portal vein embolization, if we do, many of these livers will increase to a size where we can bring in surgery and curative resection. And this is one of the examples of one such patient. You see pre-PV volume, post-PV volume, and then we'll go on to do the surgery. So you remove almost 2/3 of the liver. The procedure is called as extended right hepatectomy, and that's how you achieve meaningful outcome. And coming to the last part of my slide is organ and function preservation. The example I will use for organ and function preservation is low rectal cancers. So most of the people would be aware that low rectal procedures, cancer patients require a procedure which is called as APR. In APR, you remove the rectum as well as the anal canal and you make a stoma in there, a permanent stoma. Many of your patients will not accept permanent stoma because that there is a social, mental taboo around it. They don't feel good about it. And apart from giving them inconvenience, what it does is that they refuse surgery. They do not take any treatment and they go away from the hospital and then come back with obstruction and a metastatic disease. Not all of them can be saved as stoma. If the sphincters are completely destroyed, we can't help them. But a subset of patients where only internal sphincter and a part of it is involved by tumor, we can do a procedure which is called as ISR, where you go into the planes of the sphincter, remove part of the internal sphincter, and then you join it back to the anal canal. So you can see the completed procedure here, and this is the rectum being removed from here. In normal LAR, you do the division slightly up with the staplers, and in this you do it almost at the anal verge with per anal pathway. And this is a classification we use to classify these patients into subgroups which we can do that ISR procedure. With this, I will conclude my presentation and I will summarize it for you. That GI-HPV cancers, obviously many of them now can be done with minimally invasive procedures with minimal morbidity, but you require a team, you require MDT, you require expertise, and this will give us better and acceptable outcomes. Thank you very much.
Dr. Nikhil, thank you very much. I think you can take your seat here so that you can be visible. We had two wonderful presentations. I would request my first moderator, Dr. M.L. Kadasra, to set the content. I would like all of you to please actively participate, discuss. If you do not participate and discuss, there is still an exit policy. You can refer a case to Dr. Shefali Sardana and that will be fine. So you can choose any of the policies that you want. Sir, over to you, please.
Dear friends, what a wonderful talk. Just to extend Dr. Chauhan's, you can choose both. You can ask question and refer also. So I will do the same. My first question, just to set the ball rolling. We have very frequently been hearing about tumor board. Is this tumor board a practice for all patients or it is for selected patients? What is your take?
So, wonderful question, sir. So, tumor board is not a choice but the need actually, because like Dr. Nikhil also highlighted that 1% is not perfect or optimal to treat every organ cancer. So you need expertise from subspecialties like surgery, medical, radiation, molecular, radiology, pathology, and that completes the plan of action. So tumor board is one general tumor board. Fortunately, with Dr. Harik's guidance, with all our team efforts and all, we have evolved into organ-based tumor boards now. So because once you see more number of that specialty cases, you have more evidence-based data, you have more experience in that field, and that is how you can more justify the plan of action. So we have organ-based tumor board where we have one organ tumor every day. Say one day we have a GI tumor board, one day we have a gynae tumor board, one day we have a hemat tumor board, like that. And that's how the upper edge with the routine that
It's good for the patient and for the doctors also. It's a divided responsibility.
Absolutely. Dr.
So my next is about immunotherapy, targeted immunotherapy. Is it a first-line treatment for some patients?
So targeted therapy, if I talk about colorectal cancer, yes, in advanced cases where we are not aiming to do surgery as a first preferred option, it can be add-on first-line treatment based on the molecular profiling. Immunotherapy, yes, in the neoadjuvant setting, in say stage 3 cancers, colorectal cancer, and in metastatic first line in deficient MMR patient, yeah, MSI high patient, what we are talking of. This is first line.
ctDNA. So how do you rate it when we compare to our own, we are practicing medicine, CRP and ESR? Are they equivalent to, or are they much more ahead of that?
So definitely ctDNA is much more ahead of that. If I showed you that slide where the X-ray stands, CT stands, the blood test stand, and where the ctDNA stands, we have evolved to an era where ctDNA can predict the risk of recurrence up to the tune of 100%. But we are still evolving in that area where ctDNA guided treatment will decide the next plan of action, that whether we can escalate the treatment or de-escalate. So sooner we will have that answer. Also the trials are already on.
Okay, when 30-40 years back we were having autologous immune therapy for allergies.
Yes.
So is your immune therapy also based on similar concepts, or it has evolved?
So it has evolved. So now that concept of autologous immune-based therapies is the replication which gut microbiome is now evolving to. So we will have answer in couple of years that can we have that area where we can change the tumor mutation burden, or where we can change the characteristic of tumor altogether by altering the gut microbiome and have that response assessment. Currently the immunotherapies what we use, the action is they say what we have in our body is tumor has a very effective mechanism to escape our defense system, that is T cell, because they express certain antigens which tend to escape the detection by immune system. Now what immunotherapy does is it breaks down that escape phenomena so that our T cells recognize the cancer cells and they hit that area. So that is how the immunotherapy currently works. But once we evolve that gut microbiome, of course we will have that answer also.
Dr. Akash Kesri has a question.
Yes, ma'am. My question is related to liquid biopsy on the ctDNA. A very interesting new concept. I was just reading that the tumors that shed more are more likely to have a response there. I wanted to ask two questions. One regarding availability. Availability. Testing.
Okay, yes.
Then the second question was regarding how the results from these inform your treatment decision and protocol.
Wonderful question. So regarding availability, ctDNA is evolving area. So Indian labs till date have not validated up to the national or international standards. They are still in process. But there are few good international standard labs, FDA approved labs, which have their validated ctDNA for the predictability of recurrence. So one such lab, what I know is Signatera, where the innovator trial has happened, which trial I was showing to you, and second is Guardant. So they have their tumor informed versus tumor agnostic assay. Now what is the difference between two? So tumor informed is we have the tumor specimen, we know what kind of mutation profile is there, and then we try to match and test it through subsequent liquid biopsies to see whether that molecular profiling is occurring into the blood of patient, so that to predict the recurrence. Now tumor agnostic is that we don't know what exactly this somatic tumor is carrying, but in general we know what colorectal tumor profile is, and we tend to check all those markers and see what is the risk of recurrence. So both of these labs are FDA approved, they are globally standardized lab, and we are routinely utilizing their services to direct the MRD in such patients.
Dr. Vipinder Sabharwal has a question. Dr. Vipinder Sabharwal is the director of a very famous hospital. There are multiple gates there. I always confuse, sir, which gate?
So as always I say gate one, one is one. Thank you sir, always inspired by you and your CMEs, and now I'm inspired by an amazing surgeon also. Being a surgeon, and I was lucky, I just got my fellowship 3 months back. I'm at US, Chicago. So I was exposed to robotics, right? And being a passionate laparoscopic surgeon, my question is very simple. Like usually people say, as I think you also, that 1/3 is robotic, 1/3 is laparoscopic, and 1/3 is the open surgery. So somebody who's very passionate and doing a lot of GI surgery myself, Like which is the best, I mean, what do you think, which is really indicated for a robotic? I know malignancies definitely is the one thing, but otherwise in GI and hepatobiliary, where would you think that actually the robotic is required and it is helping you?
That's a very, very pertinent question, I would say. Because robotic is a hype also. A lot of hype around. Some of it we have created, some of it the companies have created. I am a passionate laparoscopic surgeon as well. Robotic is the new technique which we have adopted and not very recently. And in fact, initially I struggled with robotic. Why did I struggle with robotic? Because I was a passionate laparoscopic surgeon. So you have one technology which you know, and then you adopt to a newer technology, and then you think it is difficult, I can do that. But once you start using it, then you will realize that complex areas. Like I wouldn't give you many examples from the benign part, but the complex areas means hepatoduodenal ligament. So if you have to do a lymphadenectomy around that area, or if you have to do a removal, specifically the reconstruction part, or when you have to dissect around the blood vessels, say around the SMA, around SMD, or you have to go very low in the rectum, not upper rectum, deep, low anterior dissection, go very deep in male pelvis, very narrow pelvis. So I remember doing my LARs 4 years ago with laparoscopic technique, and if you have a low anterior dissection, very low anterior dissection, your back and shoulder is gone at the end of the procedure. So these are the anastomosis in pancreatic cancer, TJ specifically. So these are the areas where you will definitely find that robotic has an edge over laparoscopic. Apart from that, I would not put them together.
Very good.
Dr. S.K. Podar, President-elect DMA. No, इतनी जल्दी थोड़ी, इतनी जल्दी कैसे? He was President Delhi Chapter ASI till last year. He is a surgeon and he is Treasurer Physician Forum of India.
So, Dr. Rana, CT circulating tumor DNA versus circulating tumor cells, is there any difference or is it for particular cancer? And is it only for malignant disease or is it for benign disease also?
So when we say ctDNA, we mean the tumor cells, of course. That is the perspective. So when we say isolate the cells and pick out the DNA out of it, the tumor DNA, that is what is the difference between the circulating tumor cells and circulating tumor DNA. So you have more extracted the culprit out of the broad area. So that is the difference broadly between them.
And is it for benign disease also?
So malignancy we use mostly because benign generally do not metastasize, generally do not shed. So the whole fundamental is like sir already highlighted, tumors which shed are picked up by the ctDNA.
I think in future we are going to use more and more in liquid biopsy.
Absolutely.
What about PET scan?
Yes.
Dr. Rana,
थैंक्स मैम, बहुत अच्छा लगा. यू आर सो डिसेंट और बहुत अच्छा लेक्चर दिया आपने. माय क्वेश्चन है, मैं फिजिशियन, हमारे पास पेशेंट्स आते हैं, हमको नहीं पता चलता कि व्हाट डायग्नोसिस इज टू बी आस्क्ड टू द पेशेंट एंड व्हाट इन्वेस्टिगेशन. माय क्वेश्चन इज सिंपल. PET scan. What is the role of PET scan? For example, a patient comes to me at age of 50 and he is telling me, sir, क्या मेरे को आप देख लो कि मेरे को कोई कैंसर तो नहीं है, तो क्या मैं उसको PET scan रिकमेंड कर सकता हूँ? And what is the availability and how much it is accurate that it will detect cancer in the patient? Because nowadays patients at the age of 45, 50, 55, 60, you get a number of it. So what is the role of a primary physician now?
So first of all, sir, PET scan is not a screening modality. PET scan is just like another scan. Screening नहीं है ये. So आप किसी में PET scan कराओ और फुल प्रूफ तरीके से ये कह दो कि अगर कोई नेगेटिव है, कैंसर नहीं है, ऐसा बिल्कुल भी नहीं. So PET scan, like sir was asking, what is the difference between laparoscopy and a robotic thing, and where robotic has a upper edge. Now similarly, the difference between CT scan and a PET scan. Majority of cases we are accurate bang on with CT scan only. But the areas जहाँ पे CT scan XYZ there are thousands, कोई role नहीं है. As per Government of India or as per world literature, only two screening modalities, two types of tumors can be screened in India for females, that is cervical cancer and breast cancer, and in males it is prostate cancer additionally. Now some cancers can be screened based on family history, which is recommended, but ऐसा नहीं है कि आप कोई भी CM आजकल कराओ and you say वो high है तो आपको ट्यूमर है. No, till date no validation. Hepatocellular में AFP levels, but again sir, HCC can also have mild raise, so it's not a foolproof marker again.
I think Dr. Megha
I'll tell you the problem with PET, especially in Indian patient. Most of them have tuberculosis. It will be picked up like anything, and then the patient will have battery of investigation, lot of anxiety. So as Dr. Sardana said, it is basically a staging procedure in a patient who has a known cancer.
When you have diagnosed
Yes, a known cancer, you use it for staging. Otherwise, it has no role either in screening or in any other ways.
PET scan can be very misleading if you do it routinely, and because tuberculosis has such a heavy load in India, you can be misled at many points. And Dr. Megha knows it. We share a patient who had tuberculosis in the past. Unfortunately, also had CA breast left side, and she was so, I would say, practical after we discovered that she had an issue and the PET scan was picking up something, there was some activity in the chest. She said, "Sir, don't worry about it. If you keep pursuing it, you will never do anything for this patient." Fortunately, she has been able to operate on that patient. She has done wonderful work on that patient also. I would say she is known to me, and I am very grateful for the guidance that she has given. But what I want to tell you is that with history of previous tuberculosis and with abnormal activity being picked up in the chest does not necessarily mean that she has a metastasis in the chest.
Sir, I'll share a small example with you. So, जो हमारे को भी इतनी trouble आई. So this was a young lady, just married, and diagnosed with CA breast. रोहतक में treat हो रही थी. So she had a breast lump, she had supraclavicular nodes, she had mediastinal node, and this was the presentation. Now, if you have mediastinal nodes, somebody would think about कि okay, it has metastasized, and she had abdominal nodes also. So biopsy करी breast lump की, and it was difficult somehow to do a EBUS TDNA there, and abdominal nodes को किसी ने सोचा नहीं check करने का, and she was deemed palliative. She was labeled palliative because multiple nodes all over the body and breast lump. Stage 4 label किया, कीमो दिया, सर ब्रेस्ट कैंसर था, उसको स्टेज 4 लेवल किया, उसको ट्रीट किया, फॉर्चुनेटली ब्रेस्ट रिस्पॉन्ड किया, नोड्स नहीं रिस्पॉन्ड किए, देन द सेकेंड लाइन ट्रीटमेंट वाज गिवन. सो दैट इज हाउ बिफोर शी रीच्ड अस देयर वर 3 modalities of chemo, 3 lines of chemo, considering कि nodes respond नहीं कर रहे, it is a refractory disease, line of chemo was changed. Now when she approached, so then first thing was in our mind कि can we approach or test or diagnose the nodes. So first thing we did was a simpler supraclavicular node biopsy. Now it came out to be granulomatous. Second thing was still mediastinal can be a malignant thing. EBUS TBNA किया, that also came out to be granulomatous. Abdominal में हमें sample करना पड़ा because PET का ये show कर रहा था कि वो FDG evident. Now that is how you land up in soup. And once we checked all 3 areas and they all 3 were granulomatous, she was treated with a curative attempt, surgery किया, PAP CR था breast में, and this is now 5th year of follow up of her and she is cured. She didn't require any other treatment post that surgery.
But in all cases of breast CA treatment, you like to biopsy.
नहीं सर, सो हम PET जरूर करते हैं इन heavy nodal burden disease या advanced disease, But if we have an isolated area of interstices, say breast lump है, axillary node है, but एक area कहीं जाके abdominal node में है, या एक area कहीं bone में है, तो we definitely check it twice before labeling it stage 4. But vis-a-vis breast lump है, axillary node है, 4 lesion liver में है, 4 lung में है, we may not test this everywhere. So that is how on case by case basis you decide the index of suspicion and go ahead. That is how you do.
Dr. Sarath Gopalan, pediatric gastroenterologist. He has a question.
Thank you, Dr. Shefali. Having worked in your hospital as a visiting consultant in pediatric gastro for 16 years and now in a different hospital, I have a very different perspective. I have 2 questions to ask you. One is, you spoke of colon cancer. When it comes to children and in the South Asian region, children and adolescents, South Asian region, what's our data of the prevalence and the protocol? Because our situation is very different from the West. We have Dr. Chakravarti right here and Dr. Sunil Sehgal also is here. Both are stalwarts, my seniors. So what is the protocol and what is the incidence? How big a problem is it in the children and adolescent age group in the South Asian region, not only India? That's my first question.
Though I don't treat pediatric oncology, so I do treat adult oncology. So youngest patient, if I can recall, of a rectal cancer I have is 16 years of age. So because I don't treat pediatrics, so I don't have the numbers of the younger population. But what we have seen nowadays is younger population is more getting that rectal and colon adenocarcinomas. That is why we are more inclined to do molecular marker profiling and NGS profiling.
Because
in
the
these kind of
incidence has
cases.
come down 5 years.
Absolutely, and you know the diet and lifestyle is the culprit here. Now majority will have a sedentary lifestyle, majority will have a say high calorie, high fat content food, majority will have a processed food. That is where the culprit is. And we all know that plant-based diet is something. So if I give you example, that is the area where I am doing a project right now for a plant-based say food and treatment along with the curative treatment, because there are now ample publications available which say that plant-based treatment is any day superior to any animal-based treatment for say prevention of these kind of cancers. So that is how I would put it.
My second question is, what is a liquid biopsy? क्या होता है? For the benefit of the group.
Right, sir.
Liquid biopsy क्या होता है?
So liquid biopsy is basically to test the tumor through a blood sample.
Can I request to please maintain silence just for 5 minutes? Just for 5 minutes, please. So Dr. Shefali has promised another CME, maybe after 2 weeks, if there is silence here.
So I will be thankful to you if you give that opportunity. More than happy. So liquid biopsy is
Because we
basically
have done several liver biopsies, but in the West, in Europe, in Belgium, Netherlands, we do liquid liver biopsies. But what are they? What's the advantage?
liquid. See, biopsy, we all know we are testing the tumor tissue. We are testing the tumor basically. If we do it through a tissue, it is the tissue biopsy. But if we know the architecture of tumor through blood sample, that is what is liquid biopsy. Because we know that tumor tissue sheds the antigen during the process of evolution, or when they metastasize during the process of neoangiogenesis, we know it. So that is how these antigens become a part of blood circulation, what we call as a ctDNA or circulating tumor cells or a cell-free DNA. That is what the liquid or that sampling picks up and is called as a liquid biopsy.
Thank you very much for keeping silence. Just for 1 more minute, 2 more minutes. एक CME confirmed हो गई डॉक्टर शिफाली से. डॉक्टर निखिल कह रहे हैं मेरे लिए भी 2 मिनट जरा चुप रहना. ठीक है डॉक्टर तुलसी सर.
Thank you, Dr. Shefali. Very nice talk. So let me draw your attention to the recently published JAMA Oncology article, which they talked about the UPF and the risk of early colorectal cancers. We know 90% of Americans have UPF. So would you say screening to begin not at 50, maybe 40 to 45? Talk us about that.
If we talk about screening of colorectal cancer, there are 2-3 important things which we need to understand. Now, colorectal cancer, one is if you have a family history. Second is if you have the polyps in your colon. You fit into something called as a Lynch syndrome or a FAP kind of situation. So these are 2-3 scenarios, and there are very set guidelines or protocols by the international guidelines and the Indian guidelines also, that how frequent to perform colonoscopies, how frequent to do stool tests, how frequent you should test for fecal occult blood testing, fecal antigen shedding testing. There the role comes. But of course, see, we have to see the cost-benefit ratio in Indian scenarios. So we can't apply it to the mass screening as of now. Western population have a different culture. They have a different diet, they have a different culture, they have a different physiology in their population. That cannot be sacrosanct replicated to Indian population. So we have our own scenarios, own guidelines. So guidelines here do not recommend as a routine screening with colonoscopy to patients over 40 years of age where there is no indicator.
And my second question would be regarding the Orchestra RCT trial, recently published just a month back, talking about debunking tumors with chemotherapy, or do they have any advantage?
So when we say debunking,
That is cytoreductive surgery with chemotherapy. This was recently published last month, the Orchestra RCT. Talk us about that.
so now something which is called as a cytoreductive surgery, like if you could have heard that Dr. Nikhil was mentioning that there is a concept called neoadjuvant treatment. Now there is a situation where there is a limited metastasis out of the confines of that organ, or where when we see the scans and the tumor profile, we know that if we open up the abdomen, we may not be able to radically remove all of the tumor, which we call as a CC0 resection. That is complete cytoreduction, where we do not leave any gross tumor residue behind. In those situations, we practice a concept which is called as a cytoreductive surgery. We give some treatment before surgery, we reduce the tumor bulk and make it amenable to what is called as a CRS, or a cytoreductive surgery.
That probably would be only beneficial in patients who have early, stage CRC. But in patients who have metastatic colorectal cancers, this study said absolutely no benefits. In fact, the risks were more. So,
Sir, upfront it has no benefit, because
Yes.
we know that the intent is lost.
Right.
But if we practice it after neoadjuvant, if you say happen to read what is called as a CHIPROD trial, that was classical in ovarian, where we give 3 to 6 cycles of neoadjuvant and then do CRS and HIPEC in those situations. So it gives you survival advantage. So both kind of studies are there, but you have to select case by case basis and choose the appropriate patient.
my last question, ma'am, regarding the CAR T-cell therapy. See, this is a game changer in hematological malignancies like large beta cell lymphomas or in ALL. But here in solid organ cancers, the effects are not good. So there are some barriers, at least 3 barriers which I know, but probably it can't be effective unless you combine it with other drugs, other targeted therapies.
So CAR T-cell therapy, so basic concept is you extract the tumor antigen, you prime the T cells of your body and then reintroduce into the patient's body, because you have memory T cells lying there, so they multiply and they attack the tumor cells. That is the basic fundamental of CAR T-cell. Now what is the problem with solid organs is they have a subclonal population, they are polyclonal, they are heterogeneous. You may not have an appropriate population of all the clones representing that. So you cannot make a perfect CAR T, That is why the success rate is not high.
The dense extracellular matrix probably inhibits the CAR T-cell therapy.
Desmoplasia is there. There are so many
Thank you, ma'am.
Dr. Shefali, the last question is from a very wonderful man, Dr. LPS Gandhi sir. Dr. LPS Gandhi sir was the CEO of Charak Palika Hospital, HOD of ENT, honorably retired, always playing his grandchildren. He had the latest arrival just last week from in Max Hospital. Over to Dr. Gandhi sir.
When you said in all cases of colorectal cancer, one should undergo ctDNA?
No, not all patients should do ctDNA, but all stage 4 cancers should do a molecular profiling. There is a difference between two.
Okay, and then if it is done, how frequently it should be done?
So ctDNA we generally utilize in various aspects. I showed that. One is early cancers, where you want to predict a risk of recurrence. There you do it every 3 monthly for at least 2 years, because that is the maximum chance of recurrence there. Now if you are utilizing it in stage 4, where you want to monitor the response of therapy, then you may do it say 3 monthly or a 6 monthly, because these tests are costly. You have to explain it to the patient, and depending upon the affordability, you can space it up for your response assessment.
How much is the cost?
Sir, for early cancers, it is 2 lakh rupees for the 3 tests. So 3 consecutive MRD assessments, they compile it as a package. But for a metastatic setting, because the treatment say goes on for a longer period, so it's a customized based thing. It's not a package thing.
Thank you very much for a wonderful CME. I would request my moderators, speakers, Dr. Nikhil